Hello, everyone. One of the things you're doing in homework 2 that I wanted to talk a little bit more about is you're asked to judge documents as relevant or not relevant to determine whether or not, and to be able to compute this measure that we call precision at 10. We're going to dive into evaluation, so we really haven't talked about this relevance judging in much, and I wanted to give you a little bit more instructions about it, in fact. Just so that everyone was on the same page and didn't have confusion about what they were doing or the purpose of it and so on, so forth. All right, so judging relevance. So the topics that you're using actually come from, I believe they come from Trek 8. Okay, so this was the 8th year that Trek ran. I should actually verify this, but that's what I think they are. Nevertheless, it's somewhere around there, and in this time period, the topics were all made the same way, and what we call sort of the relevance judging guidelines were the same as well. So I will post these guidelines to learn for you to take a look at them. These are the actual sort of instructions that were written down at NIST for the assessors who came in. And remember, the assessors, as I posted on CampusWire, the assessors are retired intelligence analysts, and they originated the topics. It's their topic, it's their information need, and they make their own decision about whether things are relevant or not. But in particular, some things to note is that they are judging based on is or would the document be useful for writing a report. In other words, if you were to be writing a report, to be answering this topic question, the description that the analyst has put together, would you find this to be a useful document? Also, Trek established an important thing, which was if any part of the document is considered to be relevant by the assessor, then they judge the whole document relevant. So, there might just be a single sentence, and the assessor says, yeah, that would have been useful for me to see that. And it's one sentence out of a whole document, and yes, then the document is marked relevant. This is called binary relevance. It's either relevant or not relevant. But in particular, this thing is very much this notion, which is the assessor might have said, well, wait a minute, only a small portion of it is relevant. Should I still mark the whole thing as relevant? And the answer is yes. Another thing that they're told is that their judgments are independent of each other. And what I mean, this is independent of other documents. So you might well come across one document that's basically a duplicate of another document. There might be some small change, but for all intents and purposes, it looks the same to you. If you've read one, is the next one relevant to you? Well, as a search user going through, let's say, a ranked list, after you've seen information once, seeing that repeated exactly the same way is not relevant to you. But for the purposes of judging relevance, the analysts, these assessors, are told when they judge the relevance that just because, let's say, its information is duplicated or copied or you've already seen it, doesn't change that document's relevance. So it's always when you come to a document, it's as though you've started fresh. You haven't seen any other documents, your conceptions haven't changed. You are to judge that document as though it's the first time that you've seen it and judge it either relevant or not relevant. with this in mind, then you really strive to be consistent as you're making these judgments. So what sort of criteria you held in your mind as the assessor and you judged it, you kept that the same as you judged document after document after document after document. All right. So there's some big things here. There is this notion of it being usefulness. There's a strange thing that you will see talked about in the literature recently. I'm not quite sure how this has germinated and grown, but people will talk about topical relevance. So again, where's this topical coming from? Oh, it's coming from Trek Topics. And some people have gained this idea that the topic just tells us some general sense of whether something is relevant or not. There's no notion anymore about whether or not the assessor, the individual, the person who is behind the information need actually considers it personally relevant to them. And that's not true. So with Trek, especially these notions of Trek, it was the assessor who had originated the topic, who originally has the information need. It is their personal decision about whether it's useful or not. Okay? There's no notion of topically relevant at play here. It is that individual assessor's decision. Likewise, again, we've talked about any portion makes it relevant. You're going to be independent and you're going to be consistent. Now, this has an important thing that, you are not the topic's author. Okay? Since you did not originate this topic, all you can do is read that narrative that tells you, oh, a relevant document should be like this and a not relevant one be like this and so forth. And you can do your best understanding about what to judge a document to be relevant or not. But your judgments are not, so to speak, the truth, because you could never be that original person who originated that topic. Okay, so you're not the topic's author, and then when you judge relevant, this makes you a secondary assessor of relevance. The topic author is the primary assessor. They are the first, or the truth, so to speak. You are doing your best to sort of approximate what that assessor would have made a decision, but you're just cannot always be perfectly the same because you're not the same person. So there will be, and we expect there to be differences between what you might think based upon the written description of relevance and what the primary assessor might have come up with. All right. One thing to note also, so this is the usefulness here. So to really stress, so I've already said this is not this notion that you might read about topical relevance. It's not about being topical, and it's also not about presence of keywords. So you're not just simply saying, well, yes, this document contains the words of my query, and so therefore it is relevant. That is not the case. Again, remember, relevance is a notion that's held by the search user. For whatever purposes they have, they tell you, I find this relevant. In the case of Trek, the people doing it were told that they should decide it's relevant if they would have found it useful for writing a report about their topic. Okay. So absolutely, it's not like, does it contain the keywords or not? It's not about these surface features. You're not testing, whether or not your search engine works like a database. Did it correctly do the query? No, that's not what you're doing. You're making a judgment about, is this document relevant based upon the description that the primary assessor gave me when they wrote the narrative. And now you're going to give a secondary assessment, and it's going to be your best approximation about what that primary assessor meant. But it's entirely possible that you could make mistakes. We've seen things before, for example, where people on certain topics, we've had, for example, talk about brain cancer and radio waves. So the original topic author was interested in, basically, can radio waves cause brain cancer? All right. So some things of interest. We've had people come in and give them the same. So we've studied this phenomena of secondary assessor versus primary. We have Ayman Al-Harbi did an entire PhD thesis on this issue. And so some of these study participants come in, and as you may have noticed, these are fairly old documents. And some of the study participants are, what's a car phone? They'll be reading a document, it'll be talking about car phones. And they're like, what's a car phone? Well, car phones were some of the earliest mobile phones, cellular phones. Most of them had an antenna mounted outside the car. But still, then they would transmit radio waves to communicate to the cell towers. So there was the question, would these car phones be somehow causing cancer, brain cancer and stuff? By the way, as you may have noted, with the vast amount of cell phones that we use, the conclusion is that the concern is minimal. Nevertheless, you can do your own research about radio waves and brain cancer. But so we'd have a secondary assessor come in, and they wouldn't even understand the document. Whereas the primary assessor, absolutely had no trouble. They were part of that time period, and they were able to make a judgment that, oh yeah, this document is relevant to my purpose, and they would judge it relevant. Whereas the secondary assessor completely has no clue and likely ends up making an incorrect decision. There's all sorts of reasons a secondary assessor like yourself can make mistakes. Also in the radio waves and brain cancer scenario is someone reads an article about power lines and brain cancer. And they actually don't know the physics that for alternating current power lines, that they're then inducing and putting radio waves near, emanating from them. And so homes near power lines potentially are having radio waves through them from the power lines. And could that be causing more issues of cancer near power lines because of the radio waves? But the document might never talk about radio waves. It just talks about power lines near homes. The primary assessor, again, deep in this topic, might have the contextual knowledge that says, oh yeah, of course this is relevant to my needs because I understand the physics of everything here. But a secondary assessor may not. And so they wouldn't realize and recognize that this would have been relevant to the primary assessor. So, just to rehash, TREC is not about topical relevance. TREC is about these people who came up with their topics and were making decisions about whether they're relevant or not. When you read a description of what is relevant and not, that is to read the narrative in the topics, you are doing your best to try to match what the primary assessor did, but it's not possible for you to do that perfectly for all these reasons I've talked about. And again, we've talked about some of these other things that would change stuff. By the way, we can spell judgments either with an E or without an E. It depends on what country you come from. I don't know why I decided tonight to spell it with an E. All right, I'll post these guidelines to learn so that you can actually take a look at them and get a feel for what the assessors, who were these intelligence analysts who came in and worked on these topics and then later made judgments about them. You're making judgments on your own as practice in this homework assignment. All right,